What's up, summoners? King Blair here. Today, we're going to be talking about the current banner heroes, Ilynav as well as Mort, and whether or not you should pull for them. So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Link down in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off first by giving a summary on both the units and where we are right now. So, as you guys know, we are right around the corner of the collab. It's supposed to come in June. End of June, we don't know any information, but it's supposed to come end of June. They may push it back, but it is very close. We also know that CSET will get a rerun sometime in August, which is just 2 months away, as well as potentially a new summer unit that most likely is going to be Iseria, and we've seen the pictures, and she looks great, right? So, there's a lot of limited units coming, and none of these units are going to be limited. And you don't want to regret not being able to get Seaside or one of the new collab units because you used all your bookmarks up, right? So just know it is a time for saving. So you need to think critically of how you use your bookmarks, especially if you're a free-to-play player. So with that in mind, let's look at the summary of each of the units. So for Ilynav, I did a lot of testing on stream yesterday with multiple, like 2 builds. I tried the counter build and the speed build in like a Bruiser team as well as a pseudo cleave team. I had the most success with her in a cleave team. And overall, she felt okay. Right? She is a unit that has some really unique stuff to her. She's the only unit in the game that gives AoE crit damage buff to your team. The only other unit that gives critical hit damage buff is Flan, and that one's single target. So that part is super unique. She's the only unit that has really good injury, which counts for something, right? The first unit with injury. And she plays like a Charles in that her counters are really, really strong. Her S2 damage with the counter potentially does a lot of damage, but it's not always reliable. So if you want to check the testing, check out the stream. But as far as her, for PvE, I don't really see any uses for her except for those one-shot teams that people are able to come up with. Because she does give crit damage buff, I could definitely see people making some weird one-shot teams with Ilynav that give both attack buff and also give crit damage buff, right? Like I could definitely see that. But I don't think it's something that you're really going to be using her for that purpose, right? Because she mostly just does damage and injury doesn't work in PvE. The other thing, as far as PvP, as we mentioned, she kind of plays like a Charles, which means he has similar mistakes to him. But I could see she mostly is there for RTA. For RTA, she's really good in aggressive team compositions and as a decent DPS, right? She's more of a support hero, right? Most of the time that I was playing her, her DPS wasn't high enough for her to be on her own. But as a support with the crit damage buff, it did feel pretty good, right? So that's the main place you'd be using her. And for Arena, you'd be pairing her up with LQC or Stenet. So that's kind of the summary on Ilynav. Overall, she's okay. She's not a bad unit at all. She does her job well, and she plays as a support. The reason why my recommendation, though, would be for early late game players would be to not pull for her because you're not going to be able to use her. And you need to have those bookmarks ready, and you probably don't have that many bookmarks, right? You may not be ready for that. But if you like her because she's waifu, you think she looks great, you like aggressive teams, you think you can use her kind of like a General Purgus / Charles, right? It's like a combination of Charles and General Purgus, where she can do damage like a Charles, but also supports like a General Purgus, right? That's kind of her role. So if you think that's something you like, and you play aggressive team compositions like Tank, Bruiser, Cleave, or any type of aggro team, she does pretty well in those. Then, as far as Mort, all I can tell y'all, don't pull. He's kind of trash. Unless he gets a buff, he's going to still remain trash. He is basically almost unusable. I've tried so many times to make him work. I know people that have triple SS Mortalex with like top tier build that still can't make him work properly. He's a fun unit if you just want to because you like him and you want to force him. But in high-end PvP, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a single situation where you would use him, right? He does not have almost any purpose right now. No PvE, no PvP. Right now, he's not a good unit. That's all you need to know. So unless you really like her, this is the sign, or you think he'll get a buff and you want to be kind of like thinking ahead, then yeah, you could go for more. But I do not think you should pull for him, especially with all the calls that are around. And unless he gets a buff, he's not doing anything. Which he might, right? He may get an EE or something crazy like that, right? That is definitely a possibility in the future. And he may get buffed and he may be OP. But as of today, he's not good. So now, with that in mind, let's actually look closely at the kits. First, with Ilynav, because she's the one that we're going to spend the most time with. And then very shortly touching on Mort and talking about why he doesn't function as a unit. Right, so first, Ilynav, the one that you guys are here for. Stat line is going to be the exact same as Charles, where she has very low attack, decent HP. It's not that high for a knight. Decent speed. It is faster than Bazaar, but it's not that fast. It's pretty standard, right? 108. That's around like normal. I would say that's around average. It's an average speed. Defense is standard. Again, average. Crit rate is really solid, right? The crit rate's great, right? That part, perfect. Great crit rate. No crit damage help. So overall, stats, nothing crazy, right? It's very spread out, right? It's a very spread out stat line, which is why it's a little interesting, right? The HP defense, there's nothing outstanding. It's just standard bruiser, kind of average, right? Nothing crazy. Where it starts getting pretty crazy, it's the imprints. And honestly, it makes it so much easier to build her when you have imprints. The imprints really do make the build easier because it's critical hit chance. Crit hit chance is the best imprint. It gives you the most value for an imprint. You get the most stats out of this imprint, which is why it is the best self imprint, with the exception of maybe like the speed imprint that Vildred has, right? Where it's just ridiculous value. So that self imprint, really, really solid, right? So now let's actually look at the skills and what her skills can do. So first, you have the S1, which on its own does almost nothing, right? It's legit just damage that is based off of the health. There's nothing to it, right? Until you see the second part, when you use it, if it's not a dual attack, you have a 50% chance to activate Punish, which is the S2, right? And this skill does not trigger a dual attack, right? So you cannot trigger a dual attack with your Ilynav S1, but you do have a chance to do the S2 when it's not a dual attack. That means that Elra's Sword will proc this, and she's a knight, so she has access to Elra's Sword. This means that counters will proc the potential S2, right? So there's a lot of ways to actually do this, but it's only 50%, right? So that's not crazy good, and the percentage does not go up. And the Mola only goes to the actual S1 damage. You often won't see it. Here you actually see the S2, which, oh my god, the animation is gorgeous. Can I just take a second to appreciate how good she looks? Like the idle animation is one of my favorites in the game. The S2 and S3 are gorgeous and are probably the best animations in this game. They're beautiful. But as far as the S2 is going to be an attack that does a ton of damage. This S1 does so much damage. It's pretty ridiculous how much damage this S2 actually does. It's really nice, right? It does really good single target damage. And it increases her defense, which means that because this can trigger off of a counterattack or an Elra's Sword, you have the potential to realistically have Ilynav with defense buff all the time, which inherently makes her bulkier, right? Because you have a knight that has self-defense buff essentially all the time, right? Especially because you're going to be using her on Elris. So that is pretty nice because it gives her survivability and it does good damage and it also applies injury. So if you guys don't know what injury does, it's one of the mechanics that a lot of people are confused by of what it does, but it essentially lowers the overall max HP and it does 20% of that caster. So for example, if our Ruel has 20k HP, if you hit her with this skill and you do 20% of her health, that Ruel, instead of having 20% HP, now has 1600 HP. Why does that matter? Well, it means that if they heal, they only can heal up to 16k HP, rather than healing all the way up to 20k HP. So that's one of the things that's really good about that. The other thing that is really good about that is that it makes it so the actual healing that Ruel would do is lower because the overall HP is now lower. So that's another thing that injury set does that's really good. And the other thing is that this is permanent in that fight. If the unit is revived, if anything happens, it sticks. So if Maid Chloe revives someone, that injury remains, right? The other thing is that for things like Tempest Surin, injury set lowers the threshold. So that 10k HP Tempest Surin is now 8k HP, which means that now that 30% threshold before her passive activates is lower, which in a way makes it pretty interesting because you can actually S2 a Tempest Surin, and if you don't do that much damage, it will not trigger the passive because you can get it to a point where the threshold is below that 30%, right? Like if this Ilynav attack does like 25%, it will injure the T-Surin and the T-Surin passive won't activate. So it's pretty cool, but it doesn't really happen that often. So overall, that's what injury does. Just a quick rundown of what it does in case you're wondering. But it just lowers the max HP, gives her increased defense, and it looks sick. Look at this animation. Look at this. The two, like, it looks like two moons. Oh, dude, it's just gorgeous. And again, the damage is ridiculous, right? Which is why she's very similar to a Charles. You can soul burn the skill, and you can essentially use it every other turn, kind of like a Ross, right? So that part's pretty cool. Then there's the S3, which we kind of touched on. Again, another very solid skill. It's a very standard scaling with S3. That's around the same as like most bruisers. Like, it doesn't have like insane damage. It's the same as most S3's damage do. I do think the damage is a little bit lower than Charles for the S3 overall. But it's like around the same level as like a Bruiser General Purgus, right? It's kind of like a Bruiser General Purgus, where if you think General Purgus Bruiser does a lot of S3 damage, it's about the same for Ilynav. But what it also does do is it gives herself self-immunity, which again is amazing because it kind of makes her really good into control teams that don't have strips, right? Because you can essentially have immunity set up almost all the time. And it also AoE increases critical hit damage, which again is really unique because the only other unit that can do this is Flan, and Flan only does a single target, which is one of the reasons why I think she's really good for a aggro team, because this is so unique and because it does damage, unlike Flan, who doesn't do damage with their S3, right? So that's why I think it's really, really cool and really, really unique. And the damage is not bad, right? And the animation is just ridiculously insane. You just rush the enemy and you drop a ridiculously massive spear on them, right? You just legit come in, get lightning, and somehow summon a spear from the heavens. How that spear got there, I don't know, but it looks sick and I'm all for it, right? It looks so good and so clean. She looks ridiculously good. So as far as should you pull or not, so again, we mentioned, as far as builds, she's a knight, so Elder Sword makes the most sense to get the most use out of the punish. I don't think there's any other artifact that you get the most mileage out of. Yes, if you're using her for an aggro team and you don't really care for the S2, you're only using her for this S3, you can use any artifact that does damage. Will work for her. Her own artifact would work for her as well, because you would just give her crit rate, which is really nice because it makes her easier to build. So unless you're using the S2, Alrez is probably the best artifact for her. As far as builds, there's a counter and speed build. Even if she's on the counter build, I don't think she'll be as good as Charles on a full slow counter build. If you're using counter build, you still need her to be faster than DPS. So whether you go lifesteal, whether you go speed, or whether you go counter, she needs to be faster than your DPS. Like a General Purgus. She needs to be faster than your stand-in. She needs to be faster than your LQC. If you're using her with Landy, she needs to be faster than your Landy, right? Because without this crit damage buff does nothing if your team is dead, right? So you need to have her go before everyone else, right? So she needs to be as fast as you need her to be. As the slow counter bruiser build, I personally didn't have any success with it because it felt too RNG. And it's one of the things she struggles with. It's like Charles, she's too RNG, and the fact that you could just get punished this skill all the time and never get this S2. Which means your damage lowers significantly, you do no injury, and you do no increased defense, right? And injury can't go through barriers, which also sucks, right? So she has some really cool uses. And again, if you like how she looks, I would pull for her. She's definitely a decent unit. But if you're expecting a broken game-changing unit, she probably is not going to be that for you. I think she's just a good, solid unit. I would put her on like a B tier. I would put her a little bit stronger than Senya, right? Last time we talked about Senya, I mentioned she was usable and she was fun. Ilynav is a little bit stronger, has more teams you can use her with, more viable build path, and has potential to be stronger in the future. That's Ilynav. And now, Mort, we are going to go really like super zoom through Mort. I believe he has the exact same stats as Ilynav. So everything we said about Ilynav remains true for Mort. Same stat line. The imprint, exact same thing that we said for Ilynav. Best imprint, gives so much stats, makes it so much easier to build a unit, right? Pretty standard. We talked about it. Now, as far as the actual skills go, this is where it starts getting like, okay, this is weird, right? Because he's a bruiser, right? He's like Ilynav. The S1 is a decreased defense, 50%. 2 turns. Not bad. I'm a big fan of this S1. I think the S1 is probably the best skill in his kit. And that's saying a lot. Both good and bad. Why is it so good? Because it's a 50% chance to decrease defense for 2 turns. But what's really cool is that when you have Rage, it's a guaranteed if it lands. So there's no FRS check. So this will hit Ruels. This will hit T-Crossets. This will hit Kraus. This will hit anything in the game no matter how high their F-res is, even if you have 0 effectiveness, when you have Rage. That's really cool. That's probably the best skill that he has in this kit. Now we move to the S2. This part, immune to stun and sleep, it's very niche. The only thing that this stops is a Talon from stunning you and Sage Ball from sleeping you. That's it. He's not immune to provoke, so Fallen Cecilia, F10A will still provoke you. He's not immune to decreased defense, or even something like a Falconeer Clearing. Strip, decreased defense, provoked, right? So it's so niche that it's almost not good, right? And honestly, it's like very small amount of things. And with Carrot being so meta, you're getting burnt, right? You're only immune to these two, right? Which is not great. It's very niche. Then you actually have the other stuff. When he uses an S1, so this means if he doesn't have Elris Sword, it's whenever you use an S1 he gets this, which is very rare, right? Or if he uses his own S1. And it's only a freaking 40% chance to trigger. And what do you get if you happen to use your S1 and trigger this skill, right? So whether you get this from an Elris proc or if you get it from him taking his own turns, right? Which is going to take a while, and it's only 40%. That means less than every other time that you use it. It's like once every 3 times that you use this skill, you'll get the passive. Once every 3 times that you use an S1. That is very low odds of that happening. But when you do, all you get is a self-speed buff and an AoE crit resist buff for 1 turn. That's it. That's all you're getting. That's terrible. That's trash. This buff is nothing crazy. It's only for 1 turn. That is terrible. It has RNG chance to trigger. And so many other units give still speed buff and are better. Landy gives speed buff to everyone. And she doesn't have a restriction on it. Right? So it's a terrible, terrible restriction. And it's once every 2 turns. Which means that you only get crit rate like at most every other turn. If every time you do S1 and it triggers, you only get it once every other turn. So this skill is basically trash. It's useless. It's a useless S2. Mort does not have an S2. And that really does hurt him. And then we get to the S3, which is Injury. Again, we talked about what Injury does. Very similar to Ilynav. This one is up to 15%, versus Ilynav is 20% of what you could do. And what this does is it heals him, which is really good. It gives you Enrage, which is a really nice buff, right? This buff is really, really nice. And it heals, it does injury, and it does damage. And gives him Rage. Why is this bad? Because it doesn't really do that much damage, right? The damage on the skill is nothing crazy. It's less damage than a General Purgus Bruiser. It's about the same, honestly. So, we have a unit that has an S1 that's really good, right? The S1 is solid. Does not have an S2. This S2 doesn't exist. And his S3 does no damage, which means that you're never getting that injury. And you can just get barriered, right? A barrier will just stop you. So you have a unit that does S3 and then does nothing else for the rest of the fight. That's not good. That's not a good unit, right? That's terrible. He's not doing anything. So, more terrible unit. Should you pull? No, absolutely not. Unless you think he's going to get buffed or you really like how he looks, he's not worth your bookmarks. You're better off going for something else. So, I'm sorry to say it. I know he looks good. I know he looks great. I know he looks dope. But he's kind of trash. And unless he gets a buff in the future, he's not really going to be doing much at all, right? There's no reason to use him unless you really like him and you want to force him. So that's it for Mort. I don't want to go more into him. Just know that he's not that great, and I've tried him. I really have. But that's all I got for you guys today. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. Good luck to everyone summoning. I hope you guys are able to get every single unit on this planet, and you get triple SS Ilynav from a 10 pull. But that's all I got for you guys today, and I will see you next time. Peace.